Hi, my name is DeWitt Davis. I am the Associate Programmer of Shorts for Doc NYC, and we are here for the Q&A of the Doc NYC U screening for the Cuny films for the City College of New York. So with us, we have the filmmaker of Unconditional, Rumi Lee. We have the filmmaker for Soho Memory, or Szyflinger. We have the filmmaker for Supra, Timothy Chachibaia. You can say your name if you want.
It's Tim Chachibaia. Hi.
Chachibaia. We've got Eric Strait, the filmmaker of Changing the Narrative, the vision of Oscar Michaud. We have Zelda, the filmmaker from Zelda Express, Nicholas Sossi Romano. And then we have Till the Next Trip, Matthew Cologne.
Hi, Cologne, yes.
Yeah. And we have the filmmaker of Co-Video, Alan Nero.
Great to be here.
All right, I really enjoyed all your all's films. I guess I was going to start with let's start with a question for Alan and Matthew. Both of your films have a very tight connection with your family, and shooting in COVID. So I wanted to ask you, what was it like making a film with your? Oh, here we go. What was it like making a film in the COVID and with your family members? Alan, why don't you start?
Sure. It was an experience. Actually, this film came about after encountering the problems of not having any equipment whatsoever to do an earlier original film, and just came as the product of this little project that my dad and I were actually doing ourselves while I was up here, just trying to give the people something to smile about in the town. So it was interesting to see how my dad reacted and responded to being directed in some ways, but it was a good experience overall. It was a lot of fun.
Matthew?
Yeah, it was really interesting because we were living separately. So this is kind of the first time I saw him in a while, and it was really my first time really outside, because New York was like the center of the epidemic for a few months. So we shot it in May. So it was my first time like really outside and just seeing how everything was during lockdown. So yeah, it was really interesting.
And so I was going to ask Orr and Tim, both of your films have very much have a connection to place, and whether it be Georgia or Soho. So Tim, I wanted to ask you, how did your connection? What is your connection with Georgia, and how did that influence the film that you were making?
Well, sorry. Well, frankly, I just wanted to say, I mean, I was born there. I was born in Georgia, and I was raised there. I came here when I was 10 years old. So I have a bit of both in a sense. I have a bit of American, a bit of my own, home country, Georgia. So that was really a big influence on me. I grew up there. It was all, it all happened there. And I know all about, Supra and all sorts of traditions that Georgians have carried throughout centuries, and that inspired me to make something about that, to make a piece that shows a little bit of Georgia in New York and Chelsea, and that's, I think, really interesting to me. So that's why.
Were you able to go to Georgia when you were shooting?
Actually, no. Yes, yeah. So the thing is, what happened with that is, I didn't, for the first couple of weeks, the plan wasn't to talk about Supra, actually, the Georgian feast. that wasn't the goal. The goal was to talk about Chama Mama, which is a restaurant in Chelsea, all about Georgian cuisine. And that was the main goal. However, after thinking about it and consulting with a lot of friends and family, I really built this idea that Supra is really something that is connecting people, that is sort of magical, and I wanted to show that. I wanted to showcase that sort of imagery in a sense, whether I was in Georgia or in Chelsea, right? That I think that kind of speaks something there too.
And or what's your connection with Soho?
Yes. So the inspiration behind the Soho Memory Project actually started with the focus on gentrification. Living in New York, we've all been impacted by rising rents, and it happens every year, month or so, an hour, sounds like it in New York almost. So speaking of Soho, you can see through the movie, through the film, that Soho has been going through some change, and cities are subject to change. This is the nature. But a change doesn't have to be for the worse. We can actually learn from the past and in order to move to the future. So our communities and our neighborhoods are actually being developed and advanced and not replaced. So it was something that we have to talk about. We had to raise awareness on why it is important to preserve communities and not just change them. So Soho was a great example.
That's great. Rumi, I wanted to ask you about your connection to the subject of your film. I think, is another intimate portrait of family. So I was interested on your connection.
Actually, I don't have that much connection with my topic because I don't have any disabled people in my family. But one day, and I thought that today's people's love is going to very conditional love. So I wanted to find someone who is trying to love someone unconditionally and tell the true love.
Yep.
Mm.
That's great. No, I think it was a great showing of that. And then, sorry, I'm getting a little distracted by the cat. So Nicholas and Eric, you guys both picked, both of your films had were looking back to older genres, so to speak, of media that was out there. I want to start with Eric. What was your connection to Oscar Michaud, and how did you discover him and his filmmaking?
Well, I actually discovered him by accident, 2015. It's kind of like a chance encounter, if you could call it that. And after researching him, I became fascinated with his life. He was born in the late 1800s. He's a self-made man. I was just really drawn into his entrepreneurship, how he really created himself, and to be able to do it during that time when he was born and all of the adversities he had to deal with, is just make him even more of a fascinating person, a subject that so many people don't actually know about. Very little people know about Oscar Michaud and the impact he had on the film industry. He started as an author of books, which he sold himself. He wrote and sold himself. And then he started writing films and directing them, producing them. Pretty much, he was the one-man machine, So he was this very fascinating character that I just really admire and wanted to tell people about. So yeah.
That's great. Did you? Where were you able to find that all the footage, all the archival footage that you had in the film?
A lot of research. Some was the Library of Congress. Some was Blu-rays I found on Amazon. Some was DVDs that I researched. Some was in my library in my school, my college. So I had to search a lot to find his films. He made over 40 films and only I think 15 of them survived, which is unfortunate. So I was really glad to find so many of them. Yeah.
And Nicholas, what was your connection to the Zelda Express? and Nintendo, I guess.
Yeah, I've always been a video game person since I was very little. I grew up with a hand-me-down Nintendo 64, and I instantly fell in love with video games, and I've always have. And I heard about this story from a YouTube video of all things of this promotional contest ran by Nintendo in the early 90s, and it was something that when you get really deep into the video game enthusiast culture, you feel like you know a lot about the history, because the history is relatively short. Like really the most of the history starts at the 80s, so there's really not a lot. As opposed to film and television, there's not this huge broad history of spanning over 100 years. So when I heard this story, I was confused, because I surprised I had never heard it before. So I decided to dig deeper, and I was fortunate enough to get in contact with the subject of the film, Jeff Hansen, and really sit down and have a conversation with him about his life, but also just this one event. And yeah, I was just consistently drawn in by all the little details and things that they were talking about.
Oh, that's awesome. So I was also wondering, like coming from such diverse subjects, I mean, you come into the subject to make a documentary, and there's always something that comes up that sort of surprises you. So I was wondering, in your film, as you were making it, what was something that you discovered through the process of making the film that that you weren't expecting, that was just unexpected for you? So Rumi, why don't we start with you? I think you're muted.
Yeah, can I hear the question again?
Yeah, in filmmaking, in the process of making films, we often go in with a mindset of what we're going to discover, but we usually discover something different. What did you discover in your film that you weren't expecting?
Can I think about this question and come back later?
Sure.
Sorry.
No problem. Matthew, how about yourself?
I was going into this like totally blind, so I guess everything I found out was new, I was just trying to see some background story. So the film is about my dad, who's a bus driver, and it was during the middle of a pandemic, and I just wanted to see like what his daily life was. And I guess I was just trying to show like, is it worth still having these people out here in the middle of a pandemic where we still don't really know like what's going on? So I kind of found that, I mean, back then so much has changed since then, but I kind of found out that I really don't think a lot of the essential workers should have been out there, especially people with pre-existing conditions. So that's kind of what I found out from it, I guess.
And Alan, how about yourself?
I'd have to say the thing that surprised me the most was just how much the community around this theater kind of responded. Over the years, I think that we've become, as an overall society, a little bit more fragmented. I mean, especially in the last few months, we've been seeing just how fragmented we become, and sort of reverted into this sense of tribalism, at least as far as politics goes. But I've seen kind of a trend going with social media where people's connections in real life have sort of started to deteriorate in favor of preserving this image of your life as it's projected on certain social medias. And so I've seen a lot of ties, interpersonal, just kind of dissolve over time. And so in the middle of this pandemic, when everything else seems to be kind of crumbling, to have people actually responding, and stopping to tell you in person, or to call you over the phone to say, hey, just to let you know, this thing that you were doing, whether you thought it was going to help anybody or not, it actually like cheered me up in the middle of everything, where it feels like things are falling apart for us, at least there's something to make us smile. So there's this sort of communal fabric that I thought was starting to deteriorate is really just as strong as it's always been, maybe just overshadowed by the enormity of the larger overarching social media industry that we're seeing.
Sure. And then, your film was dealing with another community. What did you discover about Soho that, I know you went in thinking about the changing of the neighborhood, but what did you discover that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so such a good question. Again, we wanted to focus, we came with the idea of like, yeah, we're going to talk about gentrification and Soho changing. But then you hear about Yuki being a second generation Soho native and how she grew up in the 60s and 70s and the way it used to be and the mom and pop shops and the places and really the culture that it was and how it is different than today. And I must say that what really surprises me is that the film became so impactful because of COVID-19 right now and the pandemic and all the change that the city is still going through. So it's almost like the film became a Soho memory project by itself, documenting the documentation. So yeah, everything is just it's just an incredible Yuki sharing her stories and sharing her archives with us. Mm-hmm.
That's great. And Tim, how about for yourself? How's the restaurant doing in this time?
Yeah, restaurant's doing actually really well. Even through all this, and to that actually, like, I wanted to mention just like this idea of getting people interested in your film, kind of during the process, and building that idea that it's not just about food, it's not just about wine, that it's about this tradition that's been carried out through centuries, and that tradition has survived through wars and invasions and everything. The culture still remained and remains through COVID too. I think that's the interesting thing. It survives, and I wanted to, when I was making my film, I wanted to kind of show that. I wanted to show that Supra is not just about food or wine. It's about something that goes back, hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries, and it's about getting people together, even letting this idea of like having your enemy sit down and then making friends with them, sort of, that this idea of togetherness and collective good for everyone that's shared on Supra and the traditions that follow with that. I wanted to emphasize that. And I think the restaurant was a good way to do that, because restaurant carries that throughout COVID, throughout any sort of disease, virus, and that's the thing, that it carries Supra with it in a sense to New York City, and that's, I think, a magical thing.
Rumi, what did you discover? What surprised you as you were making your film?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't answer earlier because I shot it like 2 years ago. So when I was when I was filming this documentary, I was expecting that the mother is always positive and she is always happy with her daughter. But while I was interviewing her, I found out that she had a lot of difficulty, and I couldn't really expect how much hard it is to taking care of disabled people, because I didn't have any like that much connection with disabled people. But through her, I was able to learn a whole new word. And yeah, so it was very good experience.
How did you meet that family to begin with?
Oh yeah, so I was as I said before, I was trying to find someone who is trying to love someone very unconditionally. So I already knew there was an organization in New Jersey that's called Mirror Organization. And I searched on the website and I reached out to the pastor in that organization, and I met him and I asked him if you could you introduce me anyone, and he introduced me this mother.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So Eric, what did you discover through your research and through making the film that you just weren't expecting?
I think I discovered that I didn't know everything. After years of research, I was so in like one singular, like laser focused on Michel and his career, you know, what he did and how he did it. It wasn't until I met one of my interviewees, Mr. Michael Green. I sat with him, we was just talking while the camera was rolling, and he told me about Michel's family. I learned so much from him. And I found out that one of Michel's relatives was actually living like, where was it? I think he said Bronx, I believe. And he had a bookstore. And I looked him up, I'm like, wow, this is a whole different documentary, right? So I realized that, and it was very refreshing because I mentioned before that not a lot of people know about Michel, and many others who I interviewed didn't know about him. I had to like kind of like he did this, he did that, you know. But it was very refreshing to meet someone who not only knew of him, but knew so much about him that we could have a nice conversation where we were both like learning from each other, and we just recorded it and I made an interview out of it. So that was very refreshing, very good experience.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then Nicholas, how about you for yourself? What did you find out about The Legend of Zelda? Or no, it's not Legend of Zelda, but the Quest.
Sure, yeah. I went into the film thinking that it was going to be just retelling of a history, right? Just this history that no one, similar to Eric's, like this history, this event that not many people knew about. But over the course of shooting the film, I learned a lot more about the current state of the entertainment world, and specifically video games, obviously, about generational and like how the video games are passed down, just shared amongst people, and how that history is very much stayed alive, and how people have kept that memory alive through remakes and other types and forms of just backwards compatibility between things that were 30 years old are still just as fun and just as exciting to share with other people. And I think that's the most brilliant thing that I learned, is just that anyone can have fun. There was a moment in the film when Jeff's daughter comes down and she like sits next to him and watches him play the game. And it was just like, I wasn't expecting it to happen. I thought his kids had all gone to bed, but it was really nice to see, because it was very telling of, hey, these people are doing the same exact thing. There's just this generational gap, but they're interested in the same thing, and I love that.
That's great. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank all the filmmakers for coming to the Q&A, and thank everyone for watching. There's plenty more to watch online for Doc NYC. So please check out the rest of the Doc NYC U program and see more up and coming new filmmakers. Thank you all very much.